Thank you. All right. Welcome to today's episode of In the Know with Kat Bobineau. Today I have an extra special guest. It is Dr. Stephanie Page. You might know her from Black in STEM, as well as the work she's doing on yeast pharmacology. So, welcome to In to Know, Dr. Page.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm actually just getting in from lab, so you've got me like all garbed up in my in my lab wear.
That's
So,
perfect. That's perfect. So, since we're on the subject of work and your lab work, how about you let us know what you do?
so I've just started my postdoc at the University of North Carolina, which is also where I earned my PhD. But I have switched fields. I used to work on microbial signal transduction. So, in a nutshell, understanding how messages are conveyed or transferred inside the cells of bacteria. And I've switched fields to think in a more systems based um, realm of questions and hypotheses. And so I use yeast to understand how we detect and respond to changes to nutrients in our environment. So yeast is sort of a really good model to understand how things work in humans because yeast have a lot of the same parts. So I'm kind of um, still in transition, doing a lot of new work and doing it from the perspective of biophysics and biochemistry and trying to do a bunch of new things that haven't been done before and just doing more to, increase our knowledge on these very important systems.
Well, that is very interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know that much about yeast. I think they know that it is something you see in bread, or something that you might use for
Yeah,
beer.
a lot
So,
of people know yeast from beer,
right.
which is really interesting. A lot of the story about nutrient sensing in yeast actually developed a lot around beer. And if you're a beer producer, you want really consistent batches.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to understand the yeast. You want to know what they like in order to create certain flavors and certain notes. So it's really funny to kind of, when people think about like, well, I know beer or I know bread, and but a lot of that is has been a part of what's made yeast interesting to study. But because it's a eukaryotic organism, and because it has a lot of the same parts that we have in our cells as humans, it makes for a great model organism to use to study really important questions about human health.
So you said something very interesting, which I want to talk a little bit more about. Is eukaryote? I can never say the word, but eukaryote. That's so
Hmm.
wrong. But you know what I'm trying to say. It is not an organism that lacks what we are experiencing. So, can you explain that more? I know I'm saying the word wrong so bad. So sorry.
No, no. I get tongue tied all the time. And especially after a really long day, I get very, very tongue tied. But when we think about prokaryotic versus eukaryotic organisms, and so prokaryotic, you think of bacteria. One big bacteria people know is E. coli. And, it doesn't have a true nucleus, right? But it still contains DNA and it's still a living thing. It has to eat. It has to get rid of its waste. It replicates. Eukaryotic organisms are typically identified by having a true nucleus. And what's interesting about what we call these higher order organisms is that, from the perspective of scientific research, um, it's really difficult to do a lot of research in humans.
Mm-hmm.
We value human life. We also need statistically relevant populations to work with, and it's easier to do that with cells or with smaller organisms that we can grow in a laboratory environment. And we like to have replicates of data and things like that. And so there's this wide breadth of kind of reasons why being a part or a collective of eukaryotic organisms benefits us, because we don't necessarily always have to use ourselves to really push the scientific knowledge about these systems that are actually really fundamental to life.
Mm-hmm.
We can do it in yeast, and I can grow up billions of cells and do experiments on those cells where I can't do a lot on, for example, one human. um, is one way that I like to talk about it, but it really, just in and of itself, there are so many different model organisms that we use. Of course, partially yeast, but it does help advance our knowledge, and it really does enhance our quality of life as human beings.
So that is awesome. And yeast is a small cell. I'm sorry, it's a small cellular being that we can use that is very similar to humans, especially human cells, and we can learn a lot of information. So, what made you get interested in that particular organic system to study?
Um, Interestingly, as I was finishing my PhD, I began to sit down and think about, what are the types of questions I want to ask. So I was working on pathways that are, or a class of pathways, I'll say. So there are different ways that living things signal inside of themselves, so inside of a single cell.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working on a specific class of pathways, and I was working on a specific component in those pathways. And I was applying mostly biochemistry, but also some biophysics to understand like some fundamentals about chemical reactions and some of the physics that was happening, um, in terms of the function of those components.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to think bigger. I love thinking on the scale of mechanism, but I wanted to think about collections of components instead of just one component. And I wanted to think of collections of pathways instead of just one pathway. And so that's sort of, what I do now. And the reason that I bridged into yeast is because, one, I made a clear decision that I wanted to step outside of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I had been very used to E. coli, and I'd done a lot with E. coli, and I came up in this wonderful lineage of E. coli scientists. And I wanted to get outside of my comfort zone, but I still wanted to do biophysics. I still wanted to do biochemistry. And I had this really distinct question that I wanted to ask. And that question kind of came from my own experiences in my personal life with family members who had cancer. And this question had a lot to do with, how are cancer cells able to escape, or not necessarily escape, I would say desensitize or to chemotherapy, or survive in under circumstances where there's limited nutrient sources. And so I had all of these questions in my head, and I began to think about, what were some small, more specific questions I could ask.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of came across yeast as being a really great system to work in. And it just ended up being happenstance that another part of choosing a postdoc or any lab that you work in is the environment. And it's the person
Mm-hmm.
who's going to be mostly responsible for guiding you. And it just so happened that of all the people who I was considering, the person who I felt was the best match for me was a yeast guy. Um, and so it's part kind of wanting to branch out and wanting to do a lot more and getting closer to, problems that directly impact human health. It
Mm-hmm.
was wanting to look more at some specific questions that I was interested in, given my personal experiences. And then it was, wow, this relationship looks like it could really work out for me. So that's how I ended up in yeast.
Okay. Well, that is a pathway definitely to getting to where you wanted to go. And so, starting with E. coli, you're still using a single cell organism, but instead of bacteria, now we're using yeast.
Yeast, yeah.
And so, where exactly are you doing your postdoc now?
Yeah, so I'm at the University of North Carolina in
Okay.
the Department of Pharmacology. I decided, being a mom and having a grade school aged child, I decided I wanted to stay at the same university.
Okay.
And again, that goes to also finding a mentor who I felt I had a good connection with. But believe it or not, it's been wild. It's a very different world. Even though I just kind of moved across the street in a sense, it's a very, very different world.
Okay, so you brought up a good topic that I think we should dive into for people who might be interested or unaware. But how well or how did you navigate your PhD program being a mother?
um, it really does. It takes a support system, and I say that both for myself and my son. He was one when I started, and it's still something that kind of I get choked up when I think about it because, um, my family was very supportive of me, but there were just a lot of people there who were providing a lot of love for him too. And in the times when, he's been a motivation and a source of inspiration
Oh,
beyond like what I could even say. And I know it's really easy for people to immediately think, "Oh my gosh, it had to be so hard."
yeah.
Yes, it was hard. Um, the first 2 years, I averaged probably 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night,
Wow.
um, if not less, because these were also his toddler years.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like when things went rough in lab, I always had a reason to go back.
Right.
I wasn't going back because my experiment was working out. I was going back because I wanted to be able to walk across that stage and, hold that piece of paper in front of my son and say, we did it.
Oh.
So it definitely takes a support system. Um, my family was amazing. My son was phenomenal. He was just wonderful. He is this tiny scientist kid. Um, and at the same time, I still got to be his mom. And part of my being able to do that was having the right kind of mentor. Mentor is a big thing for me. I was in a family oriented lab. If my son was sick and I needed to leave and go pick him up, there was zero question. There
That's
was no
awesome.
pushback. If, you know, if I called in because he was sick or because I needed to volunteer at his school or, things like that, there was never an issue. And that made a big difference. I was very rarely, particularly with my research mentor, anxious about the times I needed to be out of lab for my little boy. And I think the other thing is just perseverance. I think being a mom, it kind of teaches you something about perseverance, and it matches well with being a graduate student. Um, and you're not just working and doing for yourself.
Right.
Part of my graduate school purpose was also providing a living for us and keeping a roof over my head. And this was how I was working to provide. So, in and of itself, it kind of all was interwoven.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I'm gonna say it again. My son was phenomenal. He was just amazing. There were times when, he would just sit right beside me and he had no idea what I was doing, but I wasn't reading books to him. I was reading scientific papers. And he would just sit there and listen and enjoy and coo and as he got older, to him it was this wonderful thing to have a mom who is a scientist. And
I
so
I think that's
it was very,
wonderful.
very difficult, but at the same time, I just had a different level of motivation and inspiration all along the way. And, can't say enough about the Black and STEM community,
Mm-hmm.
particularly when I was finishing those last couple of years, year and a half. And even before that, there was this online community of science communicators who were great supporters. At my institution, IMSD, the Initiative for Maximizing Student Diversity, was an amazing source. And I'll say that because it was made up of people who had done this before, they could offer a different kind of support than my family.
Okay.
But But
Oh,
also,
go ahead.
I will also send a shout out to like professional organizations. The various professional organizations that I belong to are also very, very supportive.
Okay. Do you want to actually shout them out and say their names?
So and professional organizations are big. We'll probably have a Black and STEM chat about them, but I belong to the American Society for Biochemistry and Microbiology, the Biophysical Society, and the American Society for Microbiology, and the American Chemical Society. Those four, I mean, they just put me in contact with people who were just amazing, to say the least. And then within the tiny community of, within my discipline, there was a smaller community of people, just in bacterial locomotion and signal transduction, who were just, they were great. I mean, all throughout my graduate career, they were just sending emails and just like, how are things going? Let us know, if you need anything. And, so all of those things make a big difference.
That is awesome. Okay. I'm glad that you had that support system. I think it's very important for people to realize that, this track of going to get your PhD or going to get a terminal degree is not one that is done alone. That you definitely need people in your corner, you need mentors who are going to support you. Like, being able to do something of this magnitude definitely needs a support system.
Oh, yeah. And, I'm an HBCU grad, I have to say that. And that comes with a lot of different things. And I'm never one, like, I don't like the competitive conversations about, like, what's better. But all I know is if I got missing, my advisors from A&T would come find me.
I went to an
And
HBCU, and if I had gone missing,
yeah,
they would come
yeah.
find me
One
as
of my
well.
advisors, Kate, she showed up on campus because I think maybe a year had passed since we had spoken, and she was my master's advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And she was kind of there during the time that I actually had my son, and she helped me a lot kind of find myself as a researcher and find that confidence to apply and to go for one of the top institutions in the world for what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Man, one day she called me and she was like, I am downstairs. And, it just, to me, I mean, it was the perfect day. I was having an awful day. I felt very lonely that day and very isolated that day, which happens,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for women and underrepresented minorities in sciences. You have those days. And I mean, she came and found me. And, just knowing that I was loved that much, um, that for her, our connection went beyond just being my advisor and my professor. Um, you can't, I don't know many other places you could find that. So it's, being an HBCU grad for me was just, it's something I'm very, very proud of.
Yes, I too have gone to an HBCU and a PWI, and I will say that, at an HBCU, multiple people are going to come looking for you,
Yeah.
multiple people, and at a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution, by the way, you might have your advisor looking for you. Now, my advisor at my PWI is great, and she
Hmm.
would come find me if necessary, but I know that
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to find people like that at a PWI.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, not a lot of people can say, come by the house, I'm making some pork chops and some cabbage and some and, come feed
Yes,
you some soul food and come sit down and relax and,
right.
you know,
And there's not too many that's gonna say we're barbecuing on
right,
Saturday. We expect you at the house. Don't
right,
bring anything. Like
right,
you were in school. Don't bring anything like that. Oh, I've
right.
had those experiences. Um,
It's a beautiful thing.
it is a beautiful thing, and so I want to touch base on what you started, which is Black in STEM. And
Hmm.
so, could you elaborate on that and tell the audience, if they don't know already, which they should, what Black in STEM is?
Yeah, the biggest thing that Black in STEM is a community. It started on Twitter. It's bled into other social media spaces. I have to say that it really was born out of the inspiration that I had in sort of, being a mom at the same time that I was a graduate student. It limited my ability to go to all the socials or to go to this meeting and that meeting and to participate in, for example, the Black Graduate and Professional Student Association. And I had a desire to really connect more. And so there was this inspiration that I had from what was going on with IMSD on my campus, which is really geared toward like connecting those underrepresented minorities to each other and to resources on campus.
Right.
So it was born out of that, and it was born out of the fact that there were times when I would be up really late, because I would typically start my reading and my work after my son went to bed. And I would drift onto Twitter, and I was slowly starting to find more scientists, more people like me. And I saw people like, her Twitter handle is Gem of the Ocean. I feel bad that I cannot say her name off the top of my head. Danielle Lee, Rachel Burks, like Dr. Rubidium on Twitter. And I was seeing a couple people. I was seeing what was happening with Black girl nerds, and I was just like, there's something happening around Twitter.
Right.
I was seeing what Don Gibson was doing with blurs and the blur chats. And all I did to start Black in STEM was just say, who's out there? Where are we? Where are these Black STEM professionals?
Right.
And that's how it got started. And I thought maybe 60 people might chime in. But then we trended. So many people responded, and the conversations just started to pop, and we were trending, and like different media outlets were contacting me. And then like what was really great was, even as it got bigger and bigger, I saw these relationships build. And people were being supportive and encouraging of each other, and people were saying like, oh, you're here, I'm only an hour away, like, let's connect, let's make sure you've got someone to interact with and to talk to and to have as support. So it really kind of blossomed, and we've tried to use the space, and I say we because I think it's definitely something that, because it's happened around social media, people can kind of use it for lots of different reasons. So if you hear about a job, you post about that job. If someone is looking for people who want to share more of their story, they use Black in STEM to do that.
Right.
If, this weekend, I don't know when this will air, but this weekend, the weekend of August 20th, the University System of Maryland, led by Renetta Toole, is holding the Summer Success Institute, which basically gives postdocs and graduate students and professionals and undergrads just all of this access to network and knowledge, just on the basis of migrating through, your desired trajectory. So it's kind of like using it to really connect people, but at the same time get the word out about different things that are going on, and get the word out about things that are important to us and that matter to us. And I definitely have to say, like, Jedidah Eiler and Vanguard STEM and what they did with this recent burnout series, and we were able to do like a little collaboration with Black in STEM. That was, to me, like, phenomenal, because immediately you had people just sharing their experiences and providing a source of support on their experiences. And I say little collaboration because I hope that it grows and that people are able to tap into these resources more, because it is difficult at times, because we're sometimes the only or one of few in different spaces. And this series just spoke to me on so many levels, and that's the kind of thing that happened and gelled around Black in STEM.
That is awesome, and I believe that is how we met, was on Black in STEM.
Yes. Which is, So it's funny because I remember like In the Know show popping up, and I was like, what is this? Because, and the biggest thing for me was, I need my son to see this. Because, I would go into his school and I would volunteer sometimes. And the moment that these kids would know, like, here's this Black woman, and she's a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
She's this, like, I'm a girl and she's a girl and she's a scientist.
Right.
I began to really have these experiences where I understood just the weight of our getting our faces and our stories out there.
Right. Yeah, I mean that.
Like when the first time In the Know show popped up on one of my timelines, I'm like, I need to get this to my son. I need to get this to his classroom, so that these kids can see just so much more of what's out there. Because, man, I've talked to children, and even like high school and college undergrads, who, when you say scientist, they have no real notion of what that looks like for them, what that means for them. They have no idea, like, all the things that are possible.
Right.
So, yeah, this kind of, like, your show and your work and what you're doing, like, it just hit a chord for me, like, a really strong chord.
Thank you. Yeah, I started it mostly because when I would say I'm a scientist or I'm a biologist, I not just children but adults will say, "Well, you don't look like a scientist."
Yep.
And it's like, well, what does a scientist look like then? Like, there's no cookie cutter version of a scientist. You could be white, black, Asian, brown. You can be green for all I care. If you have an interest in it and you're doing it, why do we have this cookie cutter thing? And it surprised me, like I said, that adults were doing the same thing. So,
yeah, I think when I tell people that some of the worst comments I've gotten, and kids are really honest, but some of the worst comments I've gotten have been from adults. They're just, "You're a what? You're a who? Like, how did that happen?" And, it's just this moment where in my brain I'm trying to, like, calculate what their intent is behind asking those types of questions, but at the same time wanting to respond in a way that hopefully they can learn and understand something different.
Right.
Because I realize not everyone's intentions are bad, but
No.
For some people it's really beyond their scope to say someone who looks like me
Right.
be a scientist.
Right. And it bothers me, especially with young girls in like middle school. I'm seeing them in middle school with weaves and fake eyelashes and fake nails, and they want to be an entertainer. They want to be on reality television, and that's pretty much the number one image they'll see of a Black woman when it comes to media is someone who's, lots of makeup, lots of fake stuff on and around their bodies. And, and I'm not trying to hate on them, live your life, but I do think we should have more than one image of a Black woman doing something.
Yeah. And I think we have to, to your point, it's like, I have that friend who is brilliant, and I'm pushing for her to do your show one time because she's absolutely brilliant, but she's very much that type of person. She has to have her nails done. She has to have her hair done right. When she gets up and she goes out the house, she is put together. That kind of woman, that kind of girl can grow up to be a scientist.
Right. Absolutely.
But then someone like me, who's kind of like, I love fashion and clothes, but I also love my comic books and stuff, and I like being outside, and I like, doing all different kinds of really new things. I can be a scientist, and there's no, like you said, there's no mold and there's no cookie cutter. But God, it hurts my heart sometimes to get into a space where I see a little girl and I say, "What do you want to be?" you know, and she says, I want to be dancer, entertainer, singer, blah, blah, blah. That's great. That's all fine and well. But then when I began to ask questions about, well, what are some things you're curious about? And she began, like, I had one little girl who just began to talk about, like, when she walks outside at night, she looks up at the stars.
Mm.
And and so for me, it was, if you want to be this singer and you want to be this entertainer, you can, but you can also know what the stars,
Right.
like what these stars are, what are they made of, what are they doing, and vice versa. You can be an astrophysicist and
Right.
understand so much about the universe and what's happening, but still be interested in, entertainment and singing. I mean, someone posted on Black in STEM the other day. She's a scientist and she just published her first book.
Nice.
And it's a fiction novel,
Right.
and I like to read my comic books, and I like to paint, and there are all these other things that I love to do. I like writing poetry. I like, crafting. And so there's nothing that excludes you from being able to do this. There's no interest.
Nothing at all. You
There's
know, you
no
can
place that you come from.
right. You can do science, tech, engineering, math, as well as sing, dance, play sports. Be an entertainer. There's no give or take. You can be either one you want to be or be both.
Yeah.
But I just think that sometimes we need more images of either someone doing both or someone who is in STEM.
Yeah, but I mean, period, point blank, we need more diverse pictures of Black women. Period. I
True.
mean, I'm
Very
honestly
true.
tired of the one note, like you said. I'm tired of that one note. This is all that's out there of us.
Right.
I mean, in and of ourselves, like I use this example a lot, particularly when I'm talking to organizations who want to come to me to have like a conversation about diversity, and then run with everything I say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you can line up 25 different Black women, and we're not going to answer every single question you pose to us the same way.
Right.
We're not going to dress the same way. We're not going to wear our hair the same way. We're not going to have the same skin tone. We're not going to come from the same places. And, I just wish we could do more to honor our individuality,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time as introducing, right? Like you said, like this is out there for you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've come in front of young girls who didn't understand that, yes, there are people who go to go out in nature, and they take swabs and they look for the living things that are in the grass under our feet.
Right.
Just little girls have just been interested in, like, when I walk around, are there living things under my feet? Like, what's there? What are they doing? How are they helping the grass grow and the trees grow? We need to present a diverse picture
Yes,
of Black women
do.
and who we are, and what we're capable of, and what we're doing each and every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're almost out of time. Is there any last point that you want to give to the audience?
No, I'm really honored to be here, and please join in anytime. # Black in STEM. There's also a Twitter account at Black in STEM. My Twitter is at the purple page. And, I have to once again shout out my favorite HBCU, where I earned my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and my master's degree in biology, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University.
Awesome.
And also, my environment and my cohort at the University of North Carolina, just, a lot has kind of gelled around me to bring me to the place that I am. Can't say enough about having those support systems. Can't say enough about my family and my awesome, awesome little boy. So, yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Dr. Page. And to my audience, I want to say thank you again for tuning in to another episode of In the Know with Kat Bobineau. And since Dr. Page decided she wanted to shout out her HBCU, I'm going to go ahead and shout out Stillman College. Went there and got my bachelor's in biology. And so we want to hear from you. Please send me a message. Hope you enjoyed the show. And until next time, thank you.